welcome to another video. So you may remember, you may not, a couple of months ago I did a vlog of reading the Romance Goodreads Choice Award winners for the last 12 years. And I've done the same thing, but for fantasy. So I'm going to move the cat, who is playing with the pile of books. I have got 12 years worth of Goodreads Choice Awards winners to talk through. I don't have all of the books physically with me, but I'm going to try and sort of talk through those ones that I have got and just kind of give you my thoughts on whether I think they were deserved winners, whether I think the books are any good, whether they're worth reading, or whether it was a case of the author won because they are the author rather than they had written the best book. And there's a few examples of that. So we're going to start off with 2011. Now let me set the scene. 2011, back in the day, I believe that HBO was just starting to film a little series called Game of Thrones. And everybody was very excited because George R.R. Martin had just released the fine 5th book in the series, A Dance of Dragons, which won the Goodreads Choice Awards. Now, I actually don't know when I read this. Well, I know when I read this, but I don't really know if this came out at the same time as part 1 or they came out separately. So I read what I thought was the whole series in about 2012, I think it was, because it's when I was in Cambodia. And I didn't read this one. I didn't read part 2. Sorry, cat is now going to get in the way again. And I then bought the box set from the works, 35 quid for the whole box set, bargain, and reread the whole series in, I think, 2018, 2019. And the ending of this book, by this time I was caught up in the series, which was past series 5, I think. And so I knew what was happening at the end, which, if you're not sure, it is the cliffhanger in this book, and it is the thing that happens with the Lord Commander. No spoilers. But it shocked me. It shocked me so much. Now, I really genuinely enjoy this series, and we're not going to talk about how much we all need the Winds of Winter and our thoughts on George R.R. Martin and his writing speed, because we're not going there. We're just not. But I think that the TV show did a fantastic job of adapting these books, and I think that the plot lines that they followed from the book into the TV show, fantastic, loved them. However, they didn't use all of the plot lines, and while I do think that they actually cut out things that made sense for a TV adaptation, I really want to know what happens to the plot lines that we are following in the book that we do not follow in the show. Won the Goodreads Choice Awards in 2011 because it's George R.R. Martin and because it's Game of Thrones. And again, I believe the Game of Thrones TV show was either in production or series 1 had just about come out. I think it was at that time where it was hyped and it was an exciting thing. So I'm not surprised that this one won, but I do think it is a fantastic fantasy and a well-deserved winner. The next book, I don't have physically, let's pop him up here, is The Wind Through the Keyhole by Stephen King, which won in 2012. So this one is an interesting book. So this is a standalone based in the world of the Dark Tower series. So the Dark Tower series is, I believe, 7 or 8 books that are a fantasy series. It's a sort of gunslinger, kind of Wild West-ish fantasy series. The Wind Through the Keyhole is a standalone within that series, and it is intended to be that if you have not read anything in that series, you can still read this book as a standalone. If you have read the whole series, this book adds to the lore of the world. I've never read anything. This was my very first Stephen King book. I've not read anything from the Dark Tower series. And what I really liked with The Wind in the Keyhole was the way that it was written. It's a story within a story within a story. So we first meet the characters, which I presume we follow throughout the Dark Tower, and I didn't particularly like them or get them because they weren't really very well developed, which makes sense because if you've read the whole series, why do you need character development on characters that you followed for 7 or 8 books? You know, you don't. But then when one of the main characters was then telling this story to the others, I really liked that. And then there's another story within that story, which again, I loved. I thought it was crafted so well. For me, it just showed that Stephen King, whether or not his books are something that I'm ever going to read, I'm not a horror reader, so whether or not his books are something that I'm going to ever read and enjoy, his crafting and his work on the actual craft of writing is impeccable. Again, I think this was a case of it's Stephen King, so of course he's going to win, rather than this was necessarily the best book of the year. But it was actually a decent read. I think I gave it, did I write down what I gave it? I didn't. I think I gave it like a 3.5 or a 4 star. I liked it well enough for a standalone in a series that I had no idea of. I liked it well enough. We then get to 2013 and we get to we get to the first of the Neil Gaimans that we're talking about, which is The Ocean at the End of the Lane. This one is weird, basically. So I do feel like this one, this book, let me explain what the book's about first. This book follows a man who is at a funeral. I think it's like a family member's funeral, like possibly a parent. I'm not 100% sure. I either don't remember or it wasn't said. But he decides that he decides just to kind of go off in his car, and he goes to his childhood home and his friend's childhood home, which lived down the lane from him on a farm. And when he gets there, he sees this old lady and he thinks, oh, you won't remember me, but I was friends with, your granddaughter, or it must be your daughter because you're an old lady now. Back when we were tiny. And she's like, oh, of course I remember you, mothers, sure, they always do. And he's then like recollecting on his time being friends with this girl and how they believed that there was this like magical world that they were in, and that they'd kind of brought over this dark monster from the other side, and how she was in this boy's house and was trying to kill him, and how eventually the girl sacrifices herself to save the boy. But the story is that her mother tells everybody, oh, she's got off to Australia. She's not dead, she's moved to Australia. And it's weird because we get there and we're hearing this whole story about the time of them in childhood, but from an adult perspective. And so we don't really know whether this was like a really elaborate game or that it was actual magic. And I quite like that kind of speculative element to this one. And it does leave everything very, very open-ended. You do not know whether this all actually happened or it didn't. So I did enjoy this one. But I do think that this one won because it's Neil Gaiman rather than it's the best fantasy book that has been written, to be totally honest. I think I gave it a 3 star. I liked it. I didn't love it. 2014, we have got, what's it called? The Book of Life, which is book 3 in the Discovery of Witches series. I have book 2 next to me, which I'm going to show you, but it is not this book. I have chosen to DNF the series after book 2. And that's not necessarily a case of I did not enjoy the series. I found A Discovery of Witches fine. I liked it. I didn't really like the characters, but I liked where the story was going, and I think I gave it a low 4 star. It's like a 3.5, borderline 4 star. Shadow of Night, I don't feel like the plot progressed, but I don't feel like it progressed far enough or quickly enough or with enough excitement for me to really enjoy the series that much. So I finished it and I gave it a 3 star. Again, fine. However, I feel like where the book finishes at Shadow of Night, I am fine with that. I am not curious about what happens next. I don't really care anymore about Ashmole 782, or I don't remember what it's called, to be totally honest. I don't care about Matthew and Diana's relationship. So I've decided to DNF the series, which means I won't be reading the Book of Life, so I can't really say whether or not it is the best fantasy that's been written. Having read through some reviews of the Book of Life, I have a sneaky suspicion that people will, but I feel like people were waiting, and from the look of the reviews on Goodreads, there was quite a lot of disappointment. And so I am quite glad that I didn't read it, because I think that I would not have enjoyed it. And I get the feeling that it was, again, a well-known big title series, a finale to a big title series that won because it was Deborah Harkness and this series, rather than it was the best fantasy book written in the year. But again, I haven't read the Book of Life, so I can't really comment too much. Now on to so we're up to 2015, and we have our second Neil Gaiman book on the list, which is Trigger Warning. I don't own it. I have many issues with this book. So I DNF'd this book at about 30%, 40% in. And the reason being, short stories I think are difficult to do. Or, well, they're difficult to do well, and a short story collection is difficult to be something that is a really good read. You know, you might have one really good short story, but the rest might not be. You know, if there's one weak one, it kind of lets everything down. And I don't think that these short stories were bad per se, but they were not fantasy. My second, and I'm going to circle back to my point A about them not being fantasy, but my second critique with these is the point of the collection, and Neil Gaiman wrote this in an introduction to the collection, is that he'd heard the term trigger warning, and basically he didn't like it. He didn't like the thought that people needed to be told what could be triggering in their books. So he decided to write a whole short story collection about books, with stories that are going to be triggering. And to me, first of all, this just sounds like a white man boomer throwing his toys out the pram on something he doesn't understand. And that, I think, is the key point. Because throughout the short stories, they are creepy. There is a horror element in all of them. Some of them have a kind of magical, slightly fantastical element, but none of them are triggers. So as an example, one of the, I think it's like the second story, is about this man who wants to go and visit this maze. It's a labyrinth, it's off the side of the road, and he wants to visit it, but he gets there and the old man that owns this labyrinth says, no, it's closed, it burnt down. And he wants to go over there and see it. And, you know, this old man is telling him this story of how in labyrinths there's usually a monster, and if you get lost, the monster will get you. And he decides to walk through the burnt element of the maze. He can't get out, he gets eaten, he gets assumedly eaten by a monster. Where's the trigger in that? Like, what? How does that story show something that is going to be damaging or upsetting to someone's lived experience? And this is the whole point. Like, all of the stories have a creepy element. There's kind of ones that make you go, oh, I don't think I like that, sent a shiver down my spine, but not triggering. And so I think it was a very good horror short story collection. It was not a good fantasy short story collection, and it had nothing to do with trigger warnings, like the name suggested. So I do think Trigger Warning won purely because it was written by Neil Gaiman. I do not think it was the best book written in that year. I do not think it was the best fantasy written. I don't even think it was probably the best horror. 2016. And 2016 and 2017, we're back in the wizarding world of J.K. Rowling. So with these two books, and I'm going to sort of talk about them together, 2016 winner was The Cursed Child, and 2017 winner was Fantastic Beasts and Where to Find Them. Both of these are aside from the Harry Potter series, Cursed Child is a play and Fantastic Beasts is a screenplay. I personally don't think either of them need to exist. So we'll start with Cursed Child, which I guess is like canon. For me, Cursed Child, and I read this in 2016 when it came out, so I did not want to reread it. Cursed Child changes the characters so much. I mean the personalities of the characters. So for example, throughout the Harry Potter series, you've got Ron, who is a humorous sidekick. You know, he has these witty one-liners. He is a funny character. In Cursed Child, he was a cardboard cutout that seemed to be wheeled on, say a line, and wheeled off. And I just felt like, you know, for one of your core characters to change that much is not good. And again, like I said, I haven't read this. When did I read this? 2016, so 6-7 years ago. I don't intend to ever reread this play. But I remember like there were other characters where the personalities changed. There were things in the world that seemed to be completely different to how they had been in that like main series. And I think this one won purely because it was associated with Harry Potter rather than it being any kind of decent book. Because this was a universally accepted to be a bad book, a awful story, and just not good. And then we've got Fantastic Beasts. Now, Fantastic Beasts, I feel actually was an interesting story. But my issue with Fantastic Beasts is that it does not need to exist as a book, because you lose the drama and the excitement that you get in the film, and you don't gain any extra additional information that you'd normally get from a book. So it doesn't need to exist. So yeah, again, it won because it's associated with Harry Potter rather than it being a good book. My battery is flashing. I'm going to stop there and go and change my battery. Hello again. So with the two books just spoken about, the two J.K. Rowling books, I do not want to promote J.K. Rowling. I think she's an awful human being. I did want to touch on those two books, which, like I said, I don't think either of them need to exist as books. I don't think either of them needs to exist full stop, to be totally honest. Neither of them are good books. But I did have a look at what came second in each of those years, just to kind of get an idea of what would have won if they weren't up against a Harry Potter book at the peak of Harry Potter excitement. Bearing in mind, again, this is 2016, 2017, the kind of main anti-J.K. Rowling feeling came out, and I think it was 2020, so this was still very much when people were big fans. But the book that came second in 2016 was A Gathering of Shadows by V. Schwab, which is the third book in the A Dark Shade of Magic trilogy. That is not a trilogy that I have finished reading. I've read book one, which I liked but I didn't love. I felt like I'd seen all of the twists and turns and everything in it before in other YA fantasy. But I would like to continue the series. And I think that's an interesting book that came second because for me, because it's a YA fantasy as well, it kind of shows that actually it was a really, really good book to win the to come second in the fantasy group. And in 2017, the one that came in second place was Norse Mythology by Neil Gaiman. I have read that one. I really liked Norse Mythology. I felt like it read kind of like, I suppose, how it's supposed to be told, and it felt like an oral tradition. It felt like you were sitting around the fire with Grandad telling the story, and I liked that. Norse Mythology is probably one of the better Neil Gaimans that I've read. I think it is up there with Good Omens as a Neil Gaiman book that I enjoy. Unfortunately, most other Neil Gaiman books I've read I haven't particularly enjoyed. But yeah, they are the ones that came second in those years, which I think again is interesting. Moving on to 2018. I'm gonna get hate for this. The winner in 2018 was Circe. I didn't like Circe. I read it in 2020. I read it for the Magical Readathon. And whether it was a victim of the Magical Readathon where I was just reading too much, and also it being 2020, I think I probably read over 20 books that month. Because, you know, this would have been April 2020. I had nothing else to do. And yeah, was taking part in the Magical Readathon. But I gave Circe about a 3-star. I would like to reread it, potentially maybe one day, but I just found it very, very boring. I did not enjoy my time reading Circe, which is very upsetting because everybody else loves it. I do think it was probably a worthy winner of the Goodreads Choice Awards. Just because of the way that even now, when we were talking 2018, so now sort of like 5 years later, people are still reading Circe and are still excited to buy this book. So to me, that shows that it was a worthy winner. It was, you know, I think I was definitely the outlier with someone who didn't enjoy that book rather than the norm. But yeah, Circe just was not for me. Our winner in 2019 was Ninth House by Leigh Bardugo. Now I think this one was one of two kind of camps, I guess. I think this one won because it's a Leigh Bardugo, but I do also think it's a very good book. I feel like Ninth House brought back that kind of reinvigoration of dark academia. And by no means was Ninth House the first book to be a dark academia. Absolutely not, no chance. You know, we've got things like The Secret History, which I think is about 20 years old now. You know, we've got books that have been in this genre a long time before this was published. But I think this brought dark academia back to the kind of main public brain and into popularity. And I think this actually was a very, very good book. I gave it a 4.5. I really enjoyed it. I think as well that people who liked Leigh Bardugo in the Grishaverse read this and were shocked by the darkness and the grittiness in Ninth House. And I don't necessarily think that's a bad thing at all. I think it just shows the skill of an author to be able to go from a very light-hearted, witty banter YA fantasy to a very, very dark, with a lot of trigger warnings, a lot of content warnings, very, you know, gritty, dark academia kind of fantasy. But I still felt like her voice went through. You can kind of still see the banter and the witticisms of the characters throughout. Yeah, I do think this probably was a well-deserved winner. We now get on to 2020, and we are now in the Sarah J. Maas era. So you can probably guess the 3 books I'm about to hold up now. So 2020, in 2020, our winner was House of Earth and Blood by Sarah J. Maas. Book 1 in the Crescent City series, her first technically adult fantasy. You know, the first book that was marketed as adult, and honestly, one of my favourite Sarah J. Maas books. I am obsessed with this book. Yes, it is incredibly slow to start. Yes, there is an enormous info dump at the beginning, but I love this book so much. I do think that this got a lot of points because of Sarah J. Maas rather than because it was the best fantasy written. But I do also think that this is a well-deserved, very good fantasy book. I'm going to be basically repeating myself for the next couple, but 2021, the winner was A Court of Silver Flames by Sarah J. Maas. So we now are back in the ACOTAR world, and again we are now still in adult. We're not pretending we're YA anymore, and this book is definitely not YA. We get some mutty and filthy and fantastic. Again, is it the best fantasy that's ever been written? Especially not, was it the best fantasy written in 2021? Probably not. But it got, it got a lot of its votes from being Sarah J Maas and from, the TikTok hype and the Cassian love. I do think, again, it did deserve a place because it is a great story. No, it's probably not the best in the Akachart series. It's not Sarah J Maas's best work. So, am I fair to say that it was one of the best fantasy books? Probably not, but it won and I'm not mad about it. And then we have last year's winner, 2022, in a surprise to no one, is House of Sky and Breath by Sarah J Maas. I think you can see how much I enjoyed this one with the just sheer amount of tabs in it, and I'm excited to reread this book. Again, is this the best book ever? Probably not, but do I care? I'm a Sarah J Maas girly through and through. Bella, move your tail, my darling. Yeah, I think that I feel like anywhere you go online right now, you will see the excitement for Crescent City 3. And the fact that people are so excited for a book that's going to come out in, I think, in either in January or February 24. So we've still got another 4 or 5 months to wait, but people are already so excited. I think to me that shows why this series is deserved winners of the award. People love it. People are obsessed. So again, best book ever written? Probably not, but does it deserve a place up there? I think so. I'm sure, I don't know what my guess for the winner of 2023 will be, but you'll have to stay tuned because I will be doing predictions. But I am already predicting that the winner of 2024 is going to be Sarah J Maas again. I do feel like she is another one of these authors, like Neil Gaiman, like Stephen King. I'd say like George R.R. Martin, but let's face it, he's not an author anymore. If she has a book on the list, it is a winner. If she's released a book that year, it's won. At the end of the day, Goodreads Choice Awards is a popularity contest, and she is Miss Popular, the queen bee of the fantasy genre. Anyway, if you liked this video, please do leave me a like, subscribe down below. Let me know if you agree with my kind of thoughts on the last 12 years of the Goodreads Choice Awards, and I will see you in whatever comes next. Bye!